Hello, everyone, to another lecture. This is Deities Aloft, and I'm Dr. Austin T. Walden, and I'm so excited to bring you this lecture. I don't think you're ever going to find another lecture quite like this in any other history of aviation course. I don't think you're going to find this in a philosophy course. You've certainly never had it in a political science course or a psychology course. And so one of the things that's so fascinating to me about teaching a history of aviation course is that we get to combine a lot of things that aren't necessarily rockets and the Wright brothers and outer space into this course and this idea. And if we really think about it, we human beings have really been concerned with flying and the idea of flight since time immemorial. And so one of the things I want to do, I want to pique your interest. I want you to be a little interested in this. I'm going to base this lecture off of a book that I read while I was in graduate school, doing my PhD, taking a couple of history of aviation classes. And the book is called Like Sex with Gods. And the subtitle here is An Unorthodox History of Flying. It's by Bela Singer. It's quite an easy read, and it's quite a good read. And I never really considered how aviation was quite so entwined with this idea of godliness and of spiritualness, and also has some earthly ramifications as well. So, if you're interested in the book, and if you like this lecture whatsoever, you should check out Like Sex with Gods, An Unorthodox History of Flying by Bela Singer. It's an amazing book. It's not all about sex, but it's really about how we're all kind of tied into this idea of flight as being something as greater than ourselves. And so, let me ask you something right quick, and I've put a blank screen here for you on purpose. Why are we so concerned with flight? Why do you care about flying? Why did you spend money to take a history of aviation course? When you were a kid, why did you look up and say, oh, airplane? Why was it so interesting to you? I've got a couple of reasons that I think it may be interesting. We humans are pretty cool, and as human beings are concerned, we can do a lot of very interesting things. And I've put the elements on the right-hand side of the screen there for you so you can look at, and you can kind of think about this as we go along. A little foreshadowing here. But humans can do some really cool things. We can run. We can travel pretty fast. Not as fast as other creatures and beings, but you know what? We're pretty good. We're pretty mobile. We can also swim. We can go into the water. We can come out of the water. We can travel along in lakes and oceans, even if we have to sometimes, crossing the English Channel if we need to. But are humans able to fly all by themselves? No, unfortunately, not all by themselves. Not any kind of sustained flight as you might think. And so air, as you can see depicted on the right-hand side there, AER, air, has always been kind of forbidden to us. As humans, I think as everybody in this class will understand, the one thing that humans want to do is to be able to do anything they want to do. If there is a mountain, we want to climb it. And why do we need to climb the mountain? It does not matter. It has no importance about why we need to do it, but we need to do it. We need to move along. And so flight and being able to control air has always been the one thing that's eluded us as humans. And so we're always kind of thinking about that one thing that we want to do. And if you think about flight, if you think about something that is so easy for the birds and so difficult for us, well then surely something so difficult must be sacred, something must be spiritual, something like flight must be special, and the air is unsubstantial. I'm having a really hard time grabbing the air around me. I could pick up a book or a box or a laptop, etc., and that would be something I can feel and move around and manipulate to my desires, but really air is something that I'm not really able to manipulate with my hands, and something that the early people of the world would have been able to move around. And so really think about how frustrating it must be as an early human being to look at even people in the 1700s, 1600s, 1500s when the Renaissance was happening, to be able to look in the sky and see a bird magnificently coming to land on the ground, and we here as human beings, the smartest beings on earth, as we think we are, not able to control that or to master that. So, let me let me put something to you like this, and I've got a picture of the starry sky over here on the right. But most cultures throughout human civilization have seen the skies as home to deities. And deities is a really big fancy word for gods. The gods, God, as you could consider him or her, and any variety of any different deities and gods that you can conjure up and imagine. And so, where are we going to find Athena and Zeus and Apollo and Hermes? Well, of course, we're going to find them in the skies because those creatures are not mortal. They're not bound to the earth. They are ethereal, and they are something that is special and is different. And so humans, obviously, always from our lore, have considered something that's up in the sky as being something powerful and as something special and something sacred. And so, again, this ties into our thin air. It's visible yet really powerful. This is a powerful and natural metaphor for the spiritual and supernatural, for something to be able to be flying and going along. The other thing about deities, when we think about them in a larger aspect, is that, to be closer to godlike status, to a deity status, not only do they fly, but also deities create. And anything that has the ability to fly must be otherworldly and must be supremely talented and interesting. And so if you think about the grand myth of God and his fallen angel, the once great angel Lucifer that has fallen, when you think about it, the dark side, especially in Christian mythology, has always been represented by those fallen angels, or those that have fallen back to earth. And what do we mean? We don't mean that they fell off the mountain and came back to earth. We don't necessarily mean that they fell off the ladder or fell off the wagon. What we mean is that they were up in the sky and they were heavenly celestial beings, and now they're back down here with us. And the dark side is always willing to trap and to get those arrogant and those that are unwary and not paying attention, I guess you could say. And so, if there are gods in the sky, and if humans are interested in mastering this ability to fly like birds and to fly like gods and fly like angels, well, there has to be some way that we can communicate to our gods, that we can talk to them, that they can be receptive to us. Because after all, if human beings aren't able to talk to our gods, then there's probably no point in religion from a human perspective. If there's no communication or back and forth, then perhaps what is the point? And so communication with gods and with deities depends on this passage through air. And so a couple of really quick historical examples of humans trying to communicate with gods through air. Jacob's ladder from the book of Genesis, Elijah's chariot, the shaman's horse that we see in later slides, angels, doves, eagles, ravens. All of these things are considered to be messengers and communicators with the divine, with deities, and with gods. And often in our human history, but when humans offer prayer and sacrifices, these sacrifices convey a message of worship and devotion, and deities often respond with physical gifts to humans, good crops and good rain, and etc., and so on and so forth. And so really the air is a very interesting and intriguing medium between heaven and earth. And so, we human beings have accomplished a lot early in our human history. We domesticated earth. We can plant things as we need to. We can move boulders, and we can cut through mountains. We can create roads. We have mastered the art of fire and all that brings with it. We've been able to create ships and go through water and make submersibles and bring ourselves about through the water. And yet the air still remains untamed for a long time. And the air is proven over human history to be capricious, to be powerful, to be insubstantial, something that we can't hold on to. And so the idea of air is it still has all of our dreams and our souls. And so really, when it comes to the ancient elements, air and flight has always been something that's eluded us. And if it eludes us, then we really want it the most. There's the idea and the concept of the wild hunt. And I don't know if you've heard of this. This is in a very popular video game that's come out somewhat recently, The Wild Hunt. And the Wild Hunt, the idea here is basically is that there are homeless souls, there are slavering beasts, that are all running endlessly throughout the heavens. And I've got a depiction here. And so you can think of these as like maybe thunderstorms or upcoming storms. And really, this idea of the wild hunt is famous in Britain and in Northern Europe. And if you know anything about the climate of Britain and Northern Europe, and especially Northern England or something like that, Scotland and Ireland, it's that it's a very cloudy, very gray, very solemn atmosphere. And so the wild hunt is this idea that the reason that we have all these clouds that are constant is because all of these souls and all these beasts are moving along trying to find themselves and to find their ultimate salvation. And so you've got hounds of hell that are running with this pack, and Odin rides, the god Odin is running and leading this pack of all these people. And of course, when you've got the wild hunt, you've got a lot of shrieking ravens that are coming along, and ravens are supposed to be symbols of deities and gods and of other things that we'll kind of get into. And so, these our earthbound dogs bay at their windswept cousins, and humans huddle indoors whenever the wild hunt comes. So, an early way of explaining thunderstorms and of meteorological conditions is about thinking about gods and deities being in the sky. And so, I would like to talk a little bit about the Hebrew beginnings. Life itself is bound to air and breathing. Without air, without breathing, the thing that makes flight possible, we also don't exist as humans, and yet we don't have the mastery of it, not just quite yet. And so the Hebrew word ruach can be translated as spirit or wind. And it is the wind that moves waters in the book of Genesis at the beginning of creation. God forms the human Adam from the dust of the earth, Adama, and blows the breath of life, neshama, soul, into them. So across cultures you can see. And really, if you think about it and you look and listen, language is really nuanced towards air. And so verticality is embedded really in aspiration and achievement in the human world and human psychology and our cultural ideas. To be a higher power, to be higher is a higher form of life, to be closer to God or a deity. To fall from grace, you've fallen through the sky, fallen from air, fallen from space. You've not met your goals, I guess you could say. You've fallen off the wagon. Rise to the occasion. We've succeeded. We've gone to the depths of despair. Somebody is down to earth. They're practical, they're not idealistic or creative, they're the opposite of godlike, right? They're more earthly. And so I just want you to kind of think about those things, that language is really nuanced towards air and verticality. We can talk a little bit about Mount Olympus and Mount Sinai. This is integral to the story of Moses, but God gives out the laws to Moses on Mount Sinai that I've depicted for you here on the side. And Olympus and Sinai, these mountains were considered sacred ground for many religions, and for those that are interested in that. Mount Sinai is sacred to Jewish, Christian, and Islamic religions. Where God gave laws to the Israelites. That's what happened here. Climbing Mount Sinai, steps of penitence. So to get up to the mountain, one had to take many arduous steps and climb up the mountain as they go. And climbing up these steps were seen as such an arduous task that you were supposed to be humbled by the time you get to the top of this mountain and look outside on the peak. And also Moses' cave, where he waited to receive the Ten Commandments, are all on Mount Olympus and Mount Sinai. And as I think I'm trying to tell you from this picture, these mountains are huge, they're extremely tall, they're extremely majestic, and the closer you can get on a mountain, the higher you can get on the mountain, the closer to God, hopefully, you can get. So let me ask you something. Is air masculine or feminine? Well, let's look at this. So to us, I think, gender is assigned to the air and the deities that represent it, but it may be ambiguous. Each deity reflects the attributes and the important roles credited to each gender by society. So even if Earth is a fruitful mother, the lower reaches of the sky are considered feminine, and the upper air as masculine. I also want to show you a graphic that you may have seen or not seen before. I don't know that it's in your aviation history book, but it's certainly something to talk about. Survival of the human race depends on the fertility of humans, beasts, and grains. Without the circle of life, we really don't have much. And I'm going to avoid making a Lion King reference, but really we're all connected and tied in together. Fertility is an ancient mystery and the subject of some of the most ancient rites we have as human beings. And for the ancient Romans, air is gendered as female. And so here we have a depiction of Facinus, a god himself. The phallus was one of the tokens of safety in the state, and you would often see people wearing this amulet or this piece of jewelry upon their chest or in earrings, etc. And when generals celebrate a triumph, the Facinus was often worn as protection from other spirits. So here we have an early depiction of fertility and the symbol of life being combined with wings, which is obviously a representation of godliness and continuing life. In other cultures, the Babylonian goddess Ishtar, she was the goddess of love, war, and thunderstorms. And being a goddess of thunderstorms and love and war, we see some symbols and some ideology in her that we find fascinating. First of all, she was surrounded by owls. Her feet, if you notice, are obviously talon-like, obviously bird-like. If you notice, she has wings, and she is considered to be quite a famous god, quite a good god. I always mispronounce this wrong, but Viracocha, the god of sun and storms, he was an Incan god. He was the supreme creator. And you can say the god of sun and the god of storms is someone to be interested in and to say is probably the best god. Earthbound gods certainly were inferior to gods in the sky. Of course, we even have our own traditions in modern times, but Halloween, a witch on her broomstick. And you can think of a witch as being supernatural and perhaps a fallen god if you want to think of it that way. And the Christian tradition, which I have depicted on the right here, devils are fallen angels. Previously, they were holy beings who rebelled against God, and they were cast out of heaven and brought down to the earth. So I'd like to ask you here, bats. Are bats good or bad? Well, they sleep upside down. They have wings to cloak themselves. They have the ability to fly through the night, which you're not seeing a dove fly through the night, but bats fly through the night. And also, there's the great myth and great horror of bats being blood-sucking and etc. And so, air also sometimes has evil through it or evil connotations, but for it to be evil, there needs to be good, and there needs to be some concept of God or spiritualness to get us through there and go along. I'm sure some of you have heard of Nike, the Greek winged goddess. She did not originate as footwear for Michael Jordan. She actually originated as a god, and of course as a god and one of the best gods, she is winged and is able to transverse Earth. Also, we have the ideas of Furies and Harpies. Harpies are half woman, half crow, and Harpies are sent to harass and punish, and we have these idea of ghastly flying females as we go along and more to that gendered air. Now, Nike, obviously not too ghastly, but certainly the Furies and the Harpies. In Hindu literature, birds are connoted with spiritual association. And Shakura, this bird is a partridge which loves the moon and is said to feed on its rays. Cicada is a swallow which drinks only drops of rain as they fall from the clouds. Just thinking about these ideas and these concepts, you get an idea of spiritualness and holiness and something that's otherworldly, other than humans. Nilakantha, a blue jay sacred to Sri Vishnu. And all of this is because it's really interesting, because if you think about it, a partridge really is a timid ground dweller. And the partridge in the story loves the moon, is said to feed on its rays. The swallow is an aerial acrobat. And the blue jay is an aggressive and an intelligent bird. And so all of these things kind of make us feel like we're having earthly associations with things in the sky. And so the meaning behind all this is that all of us, whether or not we're ground dwellers like the partridge, or high flyers like the swallow or the blue jay, can be nourished by spirituality, and we can be nourished by the heavens and the sky. And so, to think about Great Britain a little bit more, along the coast of Great Britain, the fisher folk believe that after death, so the people that are fishing on the seas and on the lakes, I really want to clarify that, the seamen, the fisher folk, after death they return to this world as seagulls, or as kittiwakes, or gannets. They come back. If a bird appears soon after death, it will be the soul of the recently departed saying a last farewell to their friends and to their loved ones. And if you happen to see a seagull or a kittiwake or a gannet at a time of true crisis, you take comfort in knowing that your kinfolk are around and they are looking out for you in this time of crisis. You look upon the French and British coast as well. The storm petrels are said to be the souls of harsh ship captains or of drowned mariners. Shearwaters are sometimes referred to as damned souls, unable to go to their eternal rest. So we've always had these connotations of birds and spirits and souls and deities and gods, etc. The Pueblo Indians, which are found throughout the Southwest in New Mexico and in parts of Arizona, they assigned mythic functions to a variety of birds. The Pueblo Indians thought that swallows, swifts, and hummingbirds and doves, all these were associated with rain. And the turkey vulture was associated with death, and he was the facilitator of the purification process and rebirth. And also, Pueblo medicine men used turkey vultures to assist the transition between the spirit world and the everyday. And of course, what did we use birds for? Well, birds were just the conduits, the representation from their gods. In Christian iconography, we've got two really famous photos here on the right-hand side, and I encourage you to really look and to examine these because they're quite interesting. But the biblical story of the flood, of Noah's Ark, a dove brought an olive branch to Noah's Ark, and that was the sign that waters had receded and that dry land was available. A bird was communicating from God to Noah. Doves were thought to carry messages between heaven and earth. Doves were also used to represent the Holy Spirit, and it exists in quite a lot of Christian religious paintings of all eras that you can kind of see on the right-hand side. And you could see that in this representation that when you've got this dove enshrined in the circle here, that she is praying and she is reading and she is getting closer, and the angel is beside her and she's getting closer and closer to godliness, to being one with the Lord in Christian iconography. If as a psychologist, I can talk about Sigmund Freud. Sigmund Freud insisted that the dream of flight is erotic and that our body is the phallus. He reminds us that of the sexuality associated with bird flight, and he has this quote: "When we consider that inquisitive children are told that babies are brought by a large bird, such as the stork, when we find that the ancients represented the phallus as having wings, that the commonest expression in German for male sexual activity is Vogeln, to bird, that the male organ is actually called Lucello, the bird in Italian. All these are from which learn that in dreams the wish to fly is a longing to be capable of sexual performance. Thus, according to Sigmund Freud, aviation too, which in our day is at last achieving its aim, has its infantile erotic roots." Now, Sigmund Freud loved to associate everything with sexuality and repression of sexuality and et cetera and so forth. But it is quite an interesting association that being able, as we saw in the early Roman times with Ficinus, the phallus with wings, and Sigmund Freud talking about wings and being able to pursue sexual pursuits and sexual realization, it is interesting how it all comes together. And I will make no mentions of the word cockpit. The feather gods of the Taoist priests, these Taoist priests were called feather guests or feather scholars. Buddhists whose achievement levels of enlightenment are portrayed as floating above the earth, seated on their lotus flowers, as in the top right image. Vishnu rides on Garuda, the bird, and the guardian cherub of the Hebrew Ark of the Covenant. Excuse me. Horses are regarded across cultures as the noblest of draft and riding animals. Obviously, we think of Pegasus most often. And a winged horse is the fit mount for divine beings and suitable to draw divine chariots, befitting for a noble god to ride upon a winged horse. And Pegasus, I don't know if everybody's familiar, but Pegasus is sprouted from the blood of Medusa when she is slain and her head is cut off. And he's not the most he is the most familiar, and he's not the only myth of the horse in the stable with wings. Also, besides Pegasus, we have the Valkyries, who rode upon winged horses, who were transported heroes who died in combat, and they were brought them to Valhalla. King Solomon of biblical times owned the horse of the wind and the horse of the clouds. The prophet Elijah ascends to heaven in a fiery chariot drawn by fiery horses. The ancient Arab legend describes God created the horse from the belly of the southern wind, and Muhammad rode a winged mare, Barak, through 6 heavens and entered the 7th on a flying carpet. There's a lot of this flying that seems to be coming in a lot of religions and a lot of ideas. There's also the ancient Arab legend describing God created the horse from the belly of the southern wind, and Muhammad, which I just mentioned. I wanted to show you that picture. I think it's pretty fascinating. And flying in culture has major implications. It's constantly been a theme. The ability to fly has important spiritual qualities. To be able to fly can be a gift from the divine. It could be a snare set by the forces of evil. It could be an achievement after deep and morally suspect study. The act of flying is always full of meaning. Of course, Jesus is resurrected. The Hebrew prophet Elijah ascends in that chariot. Muhammad rides the Barak. The Chinese Emperor Huan Ti becomes immortal and ascends to heaven on a dragon. And I'm sure we can think of many, many more countless ideas in culture, and especially pop culture. One of the most important people in political philosophy and certainly in religious doctrine is St. Thomas Aquinas. And St. Thomas Aquinas is said to have hovered 3 feet in the air in front of the crucifix when he gave this most magnificent lecture in front of the Church of St. Dominic in Naples. St. Margaret of Hungary, St. Bernard, and St. Catherine of Siena were all said to levitate and to fly. St. Joseph of Cupertino, who is not to be confused with the father of Jesus, but St. Joseph, physically and mentally handicapped, had a childlike disposition, was called the aviator saint for his flights and his levitations, because he was so sweet that he was able to fly and to levitate, and for quite a long period of time too. I want you to understand that we long for union, we long for communication with our gods and our deities, and we're always lacking a physical means to do this. And since we are lacking a physical means to reach our gods and our deities, we turn to symbolism. And symbolism is sex, religion, flying, dragons, horses, birds, bats. These are all parts of a symbolic web tying us somehow to heaven, or the idea of heaven. And so I'd like to give you a quote here. Things connected to the same thing are connected to each other. While particular details vary with place or with culture or religion, the elements of flight and the yearning to fly and connect with gods and deities above us are almost always universal. Thank you so much. We'll see you next time.